I didn't drop the coffee mug, even though that's probably what a movie would have demanded. It would have been dramatic, wasteful, and honestly beneath me. I make a living handling corporate disasters, not performing emotional stunts. So instead, at exactly 6:17 a.m., I stood still in my own kitchen, staring at my wife's iPhone glowing quietly on our marble countertop. As I read the screen, it felt less like messages and more like a medical report detailing the official cause of death of our marriage, all while she casually hummed to herself in the shower upstairs. The message was from Nathan, dealership, and it seared itself straight into my eyes like a brand. I read a message about a private rendezvous at a hotel and some intimate details he expected her to follow. That idiot was me. My name is Lucas Hawthorne. I'm 42 years old. I'm a senior crisis management consultant at one of Seattle's top firms the guy companies bring in when they need weaknesses identified and eliminated without hesitation. And somehow, I'd failed to see the most obvious threat in my own house. What really twisted the knife was the irony. The biggest security breach of my life had been sitting across the breakfast table from me for the past 10 years. She smiled at me every morning, kissed me goodnight, and all the while she was quietly designing her exit plan using my credit cards and my trust as leverage. I felt something settle deep in my chest. It wasn't pain, not exactly. It was that cold moment right before a hostile corporate takeover, when emotions shut down and strategy takes over completely. I snapped a photo of her phone screen with my own device, then carefully placed her iPhone back exactly where it had been, angled just right. After that, I took a slow sip of my black coffee as my mind shifted into calculation mode, asset protection, evidence gathering, and the precise dismantling of the woman who thought she could outplay me. 15 minutes later, Olivia walked into the kitchen wrapped in her silk robe, her hair still damp, smelling like expensive body wash and cheap lies. I smiled at her the same way I smile across conference tables during hostile negotiations, pleasant, controlled, unreadable. She kissed my cheek and started talking about a late meeting with clients from New York. I nodded along, poured her coffee, and asked the right questions, all while mentally listing our joint accounts, shared properties, and the prenuptial agreement she'd signed 10 years earlier when she was too in love to read the fine print. She had no idea that the man making her breakfast had already started the countdown. No clue that every word she spoke was being logged, not emotionally, but strategically. My brain was already 3 steps ahead of her amateur affair. I stood at the window and watched her drive off in the white Mercedes I bought her last year. When the gates closed behind her, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't punch a wall or collapse like betrayed husbands do in bad movies. I did something else entirely. I went to war. The drive to my office took 20 minutes through the usual Seattle drizzle, but my mind was already moving at full speed. I ran scenarios, mapped outcomes, calculated moves and countermoves. This wasn't heartbreak anymore. This was chess. Once inside my office, I locked the door, pulled the blinds, and made 3 phone calls that permanently shifted the balance of power. The first call was to Liam in our cybersecurity division, a former NSA analyst who owed me a favor after I helped get his sister's DUI charges quietly reduced. The second was to Aiden, a financial forensics specialist who could trace money through corporate shells better than the IRS ever could. And the third call went to Henry Lawson, my attorney and the most ruthless divorce lawyer in Washington state. He once left a cheating spouse so financially ruined she had to move back in with her parents at 45. I didn't tell any of them that I was hurt or betrayed. That kind of victim talk doesn't win wars. You win by treating the situation like a hostile takeover where emotions or liabilities and cold calculation is the only currency that matters. By noon, my marriage had been laid out like a crime scene across 3 monitors in my office. The financial autopsy was complete, and it was far worse than I'd prepared for. So bad, in fact, that I had to stand up and pace the room just to absorb the scale of it. This wasn't just an affair. This was organized, deliberate financial fraud carried out by someone I had trusted with everything. Olivia hadn't merely been sleeping with Nathan Brooks, the former college quarterback turned car dealership manager who liked to pretend he was some alpha entrepreneur. She'd been bankrolling his entire lifestyle with our money. The bank statements told the story in brutal detail. $400 hotel nights. $300 dinners at Daniel's Steakhouse. An $8,000 Breitling watch she'd claimed was a business gift. And worst of all, a hidden account she'd named Freedom Fund, with $45,000 quietly siphoned from our joint savings over the last 8 months. She'd been planning her escape, building her safety net, probably imagining a future where she ran off with her quarterback while I unknowingly paid the bill like a human ATM. Then Aiden pulled the emails from her cloud backups, and those hurt more than the numbers ever could. Messages where she called me boring but useful, where she told Nathan I was too focused on work to notice anything, where she said she deserved passion after being stuck with a robot for 10 years. Every sentence felt like a wager placed against me. She assumed I was too distracted, too trusting, too stupid to ever see the truth. And that miscalculation was about to cost her everything. I felt my anger condense into something sharp and pure, liquid nitrogen cold. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a violation of contract. And in my world, contract violations come with consequences. Liam delivered the final piece of the puzzle. Complete access to her digital life, texts, emails, and location data going back a full year. None of it would ever survive a courtroom, but it didn't need to. It was more than enough to destroy her where it mattered most. I watched her double life unfold like a roadmap of deceit. Every hotel check-in, every dentist appointment that turned out to be a 3-hour stay at the Grand Hyatt. Every time she told me she had to stay late at work, I could now see the truth behind it. Those long nights weren't spent in an office, they were her sitting in some dim bar with Nathan, laughing too loudly, pretending she was single and untethered to a life she was actively betraying. There were pictures too. Dozens of them. Mirror shots and hotel room selfies, the kind people take when they think they're starring in their own secret movie. She was wearing lingerie I'd bought her for our anniversary. Nathan posed shirtless, showing off a body built more by genetics than effort. They both looked absurdly happy in that shallow, temporary way affairs always look right before reality shows up to collect its debt. What really caught my attention, though, wasn't the photos. It was the emails. Buried in their exchanges were long threads about Nathan's money problems. He complained about how his wife, Emily, was constantly pressuring him about finances. He talked openly about needing new income streams just to keep his lifestyle afloat. That's when the whole picture finally snapped into focus. Nathan wasn't just sleeping with my wife. He was using her as a personal bank account to prop up his failing schemes and expensive habits. And Olivia, blinded by average sex and the fantasy of being with a real man, was too busy playing pretend to realize she was being played just as hard as I was. The irony was almost beautiful. The scammer getting scammed. The cheater being cheated. And I decided right then that both of them were going to pay the full price for their stupidity. I called Henry back and told him to start drafting the divorce paperwork immediately, with one very specific clause activated. The adultery provision in our prenuptial agreement. If I could prove infidelity, and I absolutely could, it would leave Olivia with nothing. Zero. And with the mountain of evidence filling my hard drives, this wasn't going to be a challenge. Still, winning in court wasn't enough for me. I didn't just want victory. I wanted understanding. I wanted her to know exactly how she lost, and why she'd never recover from it. That's when I decided to contact Emily Brooks. Getting a meeting with an assistant district attorney isn't easy. But I had leverage. 6 months earlier, I'd consulted on a corporate fraud case that had made her look very good in the press. I called in that favor, and by 4:30 that afternoon, I was sitting across from her in her office. Emily Brooks looked like a woman carved out of disappointment. She was 40, rail-thin in a way that comes from chronic stress, not yoga. Her short dark hair framed eyes that had clearly stopped believing in fairy tales around the same time she realized she'd married a man-child. She studied me with the kind of professional suspicion prosecutors develop after years of listening to lies. I respected it. And I was about to hand her something she wasn't expecting, the complete, documented truth. I skipped the pleasantries. Playing the sympathy card would have insulted both of us. I set a manila folder on her desk and spoke in the same tone I used during hostile boardroom negotiations. Your husband is sleeping with my wife. But that's not the real issue. The real problem is that he's been using funds from your automotive business and from my family accounts to run what appears to be a money laundering operation through his dealership's service department. I watched her carefully as she opened the folder. Her expression moved in stages: surprise, then rage, then a cold professional stillness. That final look told me she was already planning her response. Liam's documentation was airtight. Nathan had been taking cash payments for vehicle services, underreporting the amounts to the IRS, and pocketing the difference. A classic scheme that idiots always believe they invented themselves. On top of that, he'd been using a company card Emily had issued for legitimate expenses to pay for hotel rooms and gifts for Olivia. He wasn't just cheating on his wife. He was stealing from her business to do it. Emily went through the file twice. Her jaw tightened with every page. When she finally looked up at me, I saw something familiar in her eyes, something I felt myself. That moment when betrayal stops being emotional and turns into strategy. She asked, in a voice sharp enough to cut glass, "What do you want from me, Lucas?" I gave her the answer I'd been preparing since I walked in. I'm going to destroy Olivia financially and socially. You're going to destroy Nathan legally and professionally. And we're not going to interfere with each other while we do it. She didn't hesitate. She reached across the desk and shook my hand. Her grip was stronger than most men I'd done business with, firm enough to seal a deal that couldn't be undone. We spent the next hour coordinating our separate campaigns. We exchanged information, bank accounts, hotel records, message logs, building parallel cases designed to hit both targets at the same time. The goal was simple: no warnings, no preparation, no escape. Before I left, Emily shared one last detail that almost made me smile. Nathan had been planning to leave her once he'd drained enough money from Olivia. He'd assumed he could leap from one financial safety net to another like a professional parasite. The fact that he thought he could pull that off without consequences spoke volumes about a lifetime spent surviving on looks and charm instead of intelligence. We agreed to move simultaneously in 3 days. That gave me time to finish collecting evidence and gave her time to loop in the financial crimes unit she worked with. As I walked out of her office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the calm satisfaction of a perfectly planned operation. Every piece was in place. Every exit was covered. And the targets had no idea what was about to hit them. The next 3 days were torture in the best possible way. I had to act normal while Olivia kept lying and cheating. She came home from her business meetings smelling like hotel soap, telling me stories about clients who didn't exist and problems she'd never solved. I played my role flawlessly. I asked about her fake day. I laughed at her rehearsed anecdotes. And all the while, my phone quietly recorded every word for the legal proceedings that were coming. I even bought her flowers that Tuesday. Expensive roses. The kind that made her smile and say I'd been especially sweet lately. She had no idea that every small act of kindness was just another line item in the ledger of her betrayal, something that would make the truth hit harder when it finally came crashing down. I watched her text Nathan from the bathroom. I heard her laugh at whatever stupid thing he'd sent back. I saw her apply the perfume I'd bought her before heading out Wednesday afternoon, telling me she was going to visit her mother in Tacoma. Every detail registered. Every lie stacked neatly on top of the last. Each moment she thought she was getting away with it tightened the trap another notch. And I enjoyed it the way you enjoy a perfectly aged scotch, slowly, deliberately, appreciating every complex note along the way. When she came home Wednesday night, she was glowing. Relaxed. That unmistakable calm women have after spending the afternoon in bed with their boyfriend. And then she actually had the nerve to initiate sex with me. Probably damage control. Maybe an attempt to quiet whatever microscopic guilt she still possessed. I turned her down, told her I was exhausted from work. She shrugged it off and went to sleep without a second thought. Like it didn't matter. Like I didn't matter. Like our marriage was nothing more than background scenery for the real life she believed was happening somewhere else. That was the moment I knew going scorched earth was the only correct choice. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd stopped seeing me as human. I was an appliance to her. Something that paid bills and provided cover while she lived her actual existence elsewhere. Thursday morning, I told her I had a business trip to Portland and would be gone for 2 days. She tried not to look excited. Tried. She asked if I needed a ride to the airport, offered to pack my bag, all while I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. 2 uninterrupted nights at the Grand Hyatt with Nathan. No husband in the way. I could see her doing the math. She'd tell him I was out of town. They'd have romantic dinners. Wake up together. Pretend they were a real couple with a real future, instead of 2 cheaters living inside a fantasy that was about to collapse. I played my part perfectly. Packed my bag. Kissed her goodbye at 6 in the morning. Drove to the airport. Then I circled back and checked into a hotel close to home, where I spent the day finalizing details with Henry, Emily, and the specialists I'd assembled for this operation. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Emily's team executed their move. Nathan's dealership was hit with a search warrant for financial records tied to tax fraud and money laundering. At 2:15, Henry filed the divorce papers along with motions to freeze every joint account we had. At 2:30, I sent an encrypted email to Olivia's boss. I didn't mention the affair. I didn't need to. I included carefully selected evidence showing her misuse of company credit cards and falsified timesheets, proof she'd billed the firm for hours spent in hotels with Nathan. The timing was the masterpiece. Everything happened at once. No warnings. No coordination. No chance to get ahead of the damage. They were all too busy drowning in their own emergencies to realize this wasn't random. It was a coordinated strike. I sat in that hotel room watching the chaos unfold, news alerts, texts from my contacts, quiet confirmations that the plan was executing exactly as designed. Emily called at 3. Nathan was in custody for questioning. His accounts were frozen pending investigation. At 3:20, Henry texted to confirm all joint accounts were locked and Olivia's credit cards were cancelled. And at 4:15, I got a call from an old college friend who worked building security where Olivia's office was located. HR had escorted her out with a box of personal items and a termination letter pending internal review. Everything was collapsing around them, precisely on schedule. And I still hadn't reached the best part. I drove home slowly, pulling into the driveway around 6:30. I knew Olivia would arrive shortly after me, panicked and confused, trying to make sense of a world that had suddenly turned hostile. I parked in the garage, went inside, poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon, and settled into the leather chair in our living room. All the lights were off except a single lamp, casting long shadows like something out of an old noir film. I didn't check my phone. I didn't need updates. I already knew exactly what was happening and exactly how this would end. Like a chess player who sees checkmate 15 moves ahead and simply enjoys watching the opponent realize there's nowhere left to go. At 6:45, I heard her key in the lock. Her heels clicked against the marble floor. Then her voice floated in, fake cheerful, practiced. "Honey, I'm home." She entered dressed elegantly for our anniversary, unaware of the consequences awaiting her. She froze when she saw me sitting in the dark. Confusion crossed her face. I was supposed to be in Portland. Her carefully constructed reality was already cracking. "You didn't leave?" she asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice in a way I'd never heard before. "Trip got cancelled," I said calmly. No emotion. Just a statement of fact. "What trip?" she asked, still pretending. Still believing she could talk her way out. "Room 412 at the Grand Hyatt," I said. "Dinner with Nathan. And your entire future." I leaned back slightly. "Everything's cancelled, Olivia." I watched the color drain from her face so fast it was almost visible. Watched her hand move instinctively toward her purse, toward the phone that no longer offered her any kind of lifeline. She pulled out her phone and stared at the screen as it flashed service suspended. Her fingers flew across the glass, tapping and swiping in panic, but nothing responded. "Don't bother," I said, my voice slicing through the silence. "It's not going to work." She looked up at me, confused and terrified. Your phone's been remotely shut down, I continued evenly. So have your credit cards. Your access to our accounts is gone, and you can't reach anyone who might try to help you. I paused, letting the words land. You're bankrupt, Olivia. Financially. Professionally. And very soon, socially. Now sit down. She tried denial first. They always do. She said it wasn't what it looked like. Said Nathan was just a friend. Someone who understood her in ways I never had. She claimed they mostly talked about feelings, about life, and that nothing physical had really happened. I let her finish the performance. Then I took out my phone and mirrored the screen to our television. The room filled with evidence. Photos of her and Nathan kissing in hotel hallways. Receipts from restaurants they'd eaten at together. Text messages where she spelled out, in graphic detail, exactly what she wanted to do to him. Bank statements showing $45,000 transferred into an account I had never authorized. Each swipe hit like a punch. I watched her deflate in real time. Watched her understand that I hadn't guessed, hadn't suspected, I had documented everything. There was no angle left to play. No story to spin. You stole $45,000 from our family, I said calmly, the same way I'd read numbers off a quarterly report. And you invested it in a loser who lives off his wife's success while pretending to be an entrepreneur. I let that sink in. Oh, and Emily Brooks says hello, I added. Right now, the police are searching Nathan's dealership for evidence of money laundering. His accounts are frozen pending a criminal investigation. That's when she started shaking. Not from fear. From understanding. This wasn't an argument. It wasn't a confrontation. It was an execution. She just hadn't stopped moving yet. I stood and walked toward her until I was close enough to see mascara streaking down her cheeks, close enough to smell the expensive perfume I'd bought her, the same one she wore to meet another man. Take off the necklace, I said quietly. What? She whispered, her voice breaking. The necklace. The earrings. The watch. And the dress. She stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Everything you're wearing was purchased with my money, I continued. You violated the terms of our partnership. I'm reclaiming my assets. I hadn't lost anything except illusions. And I wanted her to understand that every single thing she'd taken for granted was being revoked right now, in real time. This wasn't about sex or dominance or psychology. It was about ownership. Contract law. Property rights. About making it painfully clear that nothing she had was ever truly hers. It had all been borrowed. And the loan had just been called. With shaking hands, she removed the jewelry. Slipped out of the dress she'd worn for her lover. She stood there in her underwear, clutching a pile of expensive items that no longer belonged to her, tears streaming down her face as her entire body trembled with the realization of how badly she'd miscalculated. You're cruel, she managed through sobs. No, I said quietly. I'm fair. And that's much worse. I let her stand there another minute before telling her to go upstairs and put on normal clothes. I said we weren't done talking, but I wasn't continuing the conversation while she was dressed for seduction. She fled to the guest room, not our bedroom. Instinctively, she already knew that space was no longer hers. I could hear her crying through the door while I calmly messaged Henry to confirm the next phase of our plan. 20 minutes later, she came back downstairs wearing jeans and a sweater. Her face was swollen and blotchy. She looked like a stranger in a house she'd lived in for 10 years. I explained the situation slowly, clearly, in terms even someone in shock could follow. She would sign away all rights to our joint property. In return, I wouldn't pursue criminal charges for the theft of marital funds. She would accept full responsibility for the affair and the divorce filing, activating the adultery clause in our prenuptial agreement, leaving her with nothing from our 10-year marriage. She would vacate the house within 7 days, taking only personal items she'd brought into the marriage or that I explicitly approved. Any attempt to contest these terms would result in criminal prosecution, evidence provided to the media, and the end of her career in Seattle. I laid it out like a business proposal. Because that's what it was. A transaction. Pride and rights traded for the mercy of not going to prison. She tried to argue. Said no judge would allow it. Said Washington was a community property state and she had rights. I pulled out the prenuptial agreement she'd signed after 3 glasses of champagne at our engagement party, the one my lawyer had drafted specifically for this scenario. I watched her read provisions she'd never bothered to examine when she was young, in love, and convinced nothing bad could ever happen to us. Section 14. 3 was crystal clear. Documented infidelity voided all claims to assets acquired during the marriage, with additional penalties if marital funds were misappropriated. She'd signed it. Initialed every page. Had her own attorney review it. And now it was going to finish her. But I'll have nothing, she said finally, the truth sinking in. No job. No money. No house. You'll have your freedom, I replied calmly. Which seems to be what you wanted all along. I leaned back slightly. The only difference is, you thought you'd get it while keeping my money, my house, and my reputation. I met her eyes. Now you get it while keeping exactly what you contributed to this marriage. Nothing. She spent that night in the guest room. I slept better than I had in months. For the first time in a long while, I knew exactly where the source of my stress was, and more importantly, I knew it was contained. The problem had been identified, isolated, and was already in the process of being removed. The next morning, I allowed her into our bedroom to collect personal belongings. I supervised the entire time. Not out of anger, but out of necessity. I made sure she didn't take anything that wasn't clearly hers or that had been purchased with shared funds. She filled 2 suitcases with clothes and toiletries. She tried to slip a few pieces of jewelry into the bag until I reminded her they'd come from me. She reached for a laptop I calmly pointed out was registered to my company. Every failed attempt was another quiet reminder of how completely she'd lost, how badly she'd gambled and come up empty. While she packed, I moved on to the social phase of the operation. I didn't post anything online. No dramatic announcements. No mass emails. That kind of behavior is sloppy and beneath someone in my position. Instead, I did something far more effective. I showed up to our regular Thursday night poker game at the country club. At one point, someone casually asked where Olivia was. I paused, looked down at my cards, and answered in a conversational tone that carried effortlessly through the quiet room. Olivia decided investing in aging quarterbacks was more rewarding than investing in our family, I said. Unfortunately, she used my money and my trust to fund that choice. That was it. 5 seconds. Carefully chosen words. The information spread through our social circle faster than any press release ever could. By the end of the night, my phone was full of messages, friends and business associates expressing shock, sympathy, and support. Olivia's phone, once her service was restored, was likely full of nothing at all. I'd effectively made her radioactive in Seattle society. Not through lies. Not through exaggeration. Just the truth, delivered at the right moment to the right audience. Women from her yoga class stopped responding to texts. Her so-called best friend Lauren canceled their standing lunch for the foreseeable future. Invitations to charity galas and fundraising events evaporated overnight. No one wanted to be photographed next to the woman who'd betrayed Lucas Hawthorne and been exposed so publicly. Social death takes longer than physical death, but in circles like ours, it's just as final. I observed it with the same detached interest I'd apply to any successful business strategy. The real entertainment arrived 3 days later. Nathan Brooks showed up at my office building looking like a man whose entire world had collapsed, because it had. Emily had filed for divorce and seized all joint assets, including the automotive business that had always been hers to begin with. The investigation revealed financial misconduct and other illegal activities linked to the dealership. His reputation was gone. His income was gone. His wife had cut him off completely. And somehow, he'd convinced himself this was all my fault. He cornered me in the parking garage around 7 in the evening, when most people had already gone home. He probably thought the isolation would intimidate me. Or give him an edge. He was 6'3", maybe 220, built the way men are when genetics do the work instead of discipline. He clearly believed his size could compensate for the fact that I dismantled his life piece by piece. He came at me shouting, red-faced and frantic, accusing me of destroying his life, of turning his wife against him, of ruining everything he'd built. Which was amusing, considering he'd built nothing and had spent his adult life living off Emily's success. "You rat in a suit," he yelled, spittle flying. "You set me up with Emily." He attacked me aggressively, but I defended myself and neutralized the situation without injury. He folded instantly, collapsing onto the oil-stained concrete, gasping for air. I adjusted my cufflinks and looked down at him with the kind of contempt you reserve for insects that wander where they don't belong. "You played adult games, boy," I said, crouching beside him. "And you reached into the wrong man's pocket." I leaned in just enough to be heard. "If you come near me or anything that belongs to me again, I'll make sure you go to prison, not for fraud, but for something much worse. I know where you keep your powder, Nathan. And I know exactly who you sell it to." That part was a bluff. I hadn't uncovered proof of drug dealing. But his reaction told me everything. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened, trying to deny it, but nothing came out. The alpha act vanished on the spot, replaced by the coward underneath, the man who'd never faced consequences and suddenly realized he was completely outmatched. I left him there beside my Lexus, broken and humiliated, and drove home listening to Mozart, feeling nothing about the encounter except satisfaction that another problem had been efficiently resolved. The final week Olivia spent in what used to be our house was designed to finish the job. She stayed in the guest room while Henry finalized the paperwork. During that time, I behaved as if she didn't exist. I went for my morning runs at 6. Made breakfast in the kitchen while she hid upstairs. Took work calls from my home office. Met colleagues for drinks after work. There's a psychological tactic used in hostage negotiations called strategic indifference. The idea is simple but brutal. You show the other person that they have absolutely no leverage because you genuinely don't care whether they cooperate or not. It's especially effective on people whose entire sense of worth comes from being wanted, needed, or desired. That week, she ran through every manipulation strategy she knew. She cooked elaborate, carefully planned dinners, the kind meant to remind me of home, while I sat there calmly eating, flipping through newspapers, and answering work emails like nothing was happening. She wore revealing outfits, clearly hoping to get a reaction, but I never even looked up. In my head, I'd already moved her from wife to pending liability, something that needed to be handled and processed, nothing more. She tried crying at very specific moments, aiming for sympathy. When that didn't work, she switched to anger, hoping to provoke engagement, any kind of emotional response. I gave her neither. One night, clearly desperate, she tried seduction. She appeared in my bedroom doorway wearing lingerie I knew I hadn't bought her. That meant Nathan had. Which meant she was standing there, trying to seduce me, while wearing another man's gift. The miscalculation was so embarrassing, so profoundly pathetic, that I didn't say a single word. I just stared at her until she quietly turned around and left. But I think the worst part for her wasn't my silence. It was hearing me laugh during phone calls with friends. Hearing me talk about upcoming trips, new business deals, future plans. Hearing me live a life that was actively improving without her in it. She'd probably imagined I'd be destroyed, begging her to stay, falling apart without her. Instead, she was watching me move forward while she slowly unraveled. By the 5th day, she tried one last angle, our shared history. She talked about our wedding day, our first apartment, the trips we'd taken together. All the familiar emotional blackmail people resort to when they realize they've made a catastrophic mistake. I let her finish the entire speech without interrupting. Then I asked one simple question that permanently shut that door. If those memories meant so much to you, why did you steal from me and sleep with a man you didn't even respect? She had no answer. Because there wasn't one. Just the usual rationalizations, needing happiness, feeling disconnected, all the standard stories cheaters tell themselves so they don't have to take responsibility. I didn't argue or try to correct her version of events. I didn't care what she believed about her motivations. I cared about facts. And the facts were simple: she violated a contract, and contracts come with consequences. By day 6, she stopped trying altogether. She moved through the house like a ghost, quietly collecting the few possessions she was allowed to keep. Her movements grew smaller, slower, as reality finally set in. The final night came with the typical Seattle rain, the kind that starts around noon and never lets up. While she was in the shower, I had her packed suitcases placed on the porch. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. When she came downstairs around 8, wearing jeans and a plain jacket, the only clothes she had left that weren't designer items I'd paid for, she found me standing in the foyer holding a signed divorce agreement. My face was completely blank. She looked at the open front door. At her suitcases getting soaked in the rain. At me blocking her path to anything else she might want to take. And I saw the exact moment it finally hit her: this was over. No last-minute rescue. No dramatic reconciliation. Just consequences. "Lucas, I have nowhere to go," she said, real panic creeping into her voice for the first time. "My mother says she's ashamed of me. Nathan is under investigation. I don't even have enough money for a cheap motel." I looked at her with no anger and no sympathy. Just the same detached evaluation you'd give a failed project that needed to be closed out and archived. She was 35 years old. College educated. Physically healthy. She'd spent the last decade living off my success while contributing nothing but problems I was still fixing. The idea that she expected pity now was almost laughable. "You're 35, Olivia," I said calmly. "You've got working hands and working legs. Welcome to the real world, where actions have consequences and sympathy isn't accepted as payment." "Will you ever forgive me?" she asked. I could hear hope in her voice, like she still believed there was some version of the future where this all reset back to normal. "No," I said, letting the words sit in the air. Then I added, "I'll forget you." "That's worse." I closed the heavy oak door before she could respond. The lock clicked shut with a final, satisfying sound, the clear end of that chapter of my life. Through the thick wood, I could hear her screaming my name. Crying. Pounding on the door. But it sounded distant, muted, like noise from another world that no longer involved me. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and looked around the quiet house. For the first time in months, it felt clean. The marble countertops were clear. The furniture was mine. Even the air felt lighter without the weight of her presence and her lies. I sat at the breakfast bar, the same place where I discovered her betrayal, pulled out my phone, deleted her contact, blocked her number, removed her from my emergency contacts, my insurance beneficiaries, and every other digital tie connecting us. By the time I finished my water, the crying outside had stopped. A car pulled up, probably a rideshare she'd managed to call using whatever phone service she'd scraped together, or borrowed from someone still willing to answer her calls. And just like that, she was gone. I heard her suitcases being loaded into the car. I heard the engine start, the tires roll away, and then there was nothing left but rain, silence, and the deep, unmistakable satisfaction of knowing a problem had been solved fully and permanently. I went upstairs to my bedroom, the master bedroom that belonged only to me now, and slept for 9 uninterrupted hours. It was the heavy, dreamless sleep of someone who had finished a difficult job and had nothing left to second guess. The next morning, I woke up at 6 like always. I went for my run through the wet Seattle streets, came home to a house that suddenly felt twice as large and infinitely calmer, and started mapping out the next phase of my life. I had Henry begin the process of removing Olivia's name from every shared document, deed, and account we'd ever touched. I also called a designer to start remodeling the master bedroom. I had no interest in sleeping in a space that still carried her fingerprints. I scheduled dinners with 3 different women I'd met over the years through business. They were attractive, accomplished, confident women who had shown interest back when I was married, and whom I'd politely turned down at the time. I wasn't looking for a relationship, maybe never would be again, but I did want to remind myself that the world was wide open now. I was no longer tied to someone who saw me as a bank account and a safety net. 6 weeks later, the divorce was finalized. Olivia signed every document without a fight. Henry had made it very clear to her that resisting would only make the situation worse and could cross into criminal territory. She kept her personal belongings, the car she'd owned before we married, and exactly nothing else. I kept the house, the investments, the retirement accounts, the vacation property in Bend, and my reputation intact. Everyone who mattered knew I'd been wronged and that I'd handled it cleanly. Emily Brooks sent me a bottle of expensive scotch with a short note that read, "Justice served." I took that as confirmation that Nathan's legal problems had turned into convictions that would keep him occupied for the next 3 to 5 years. According to mutual acquaintances who still occasionally mentioned her before quickly changing the subject, Olivia moved to Portland. She was working as a sales associate in a furniture store, living in a studio apartment, and driving a 10-year-old car with well over 100,000 miles on it. I didn't ask for updates, but people volunteered them anyway. Out of idle curiosity, I checked her social media exactly once. The woman in those photos looked a decade older than her actual age, posting inspirational quotes about fresh starts and learning from mistakes. It felt like the digital version of whistling past a graveyard. I felt nothing looking at it. No satisfaction. No regret. Just the detached curiosity you might have watching a documentary about animals that once existed and were now gone. I rebuilt my life slowly and deliberately, treating it like any other project that required planning and execution. I renovated the house one room at a time, wiping away every trace of our shared history and replacing it with spaces designed entirely around my preferences and my future. I took up sailing, something I'd always wanted to try but Olivia had dismissed as boring, and discovered I had a natural feel for wind and tide. I created new routines with new people. I joined a different country club where no one knew my marital history. I started attending cultural events and charity functions where I was just Lucas Hawthorne, the consultant, not Lucas Hawthorne, the guy whose wife had cheated on him. Within 6 months, the story faded into Seattle's collective memory as just another example of greed and poor judgment. Within a year, most people had forgotten it entirely, which was exactly what I wanted. I never contacted Olivia again. I never drove past her old workplace. I never asked about her life after she left. She became exactly what I'd promised she would become: forgotten. A closed file in a cabinet I never opened. The anger I'd felt that morning reading her messages didn't linger. It got processed, converted into action, and once the action was complete, there was nothing left to feel. Some men might say forgiveness is necessary, or that people make mistakes and relationships are complicated. Those men have never had someone systematically steal from them while laughing behind their back. They've never had to rebuild trust from zero or accept that the person they chose as a partner saw them as a resource to be exploited. 3 years later, I remarried. Her name was Isabella, and she ran her own architectural firm. She had a prenup ready before I even brought it up, which told me everything I needed to know. We kept the ceremony small, 50 guests, bought a different house together with no shared history, and built a relationship on direct communication and complete transparency about money, expectations, and boundaries. She knew about Olivia. I told her the entire story on our 3rd date. After you've been burned by lies, radical honesty stops feeling optional. Isabella listened, nodded once, and said, "That's what happens when people underestimate consequences." We've been happy in the quiet, stable way that comes from two people who lived through chaos and decided they prefer reliability over drama. And sometimes, late at night when sleep doesn't come, I think back to that morning in the kitchen, the moment I read Olivia's messages and felt that cold clarity settle in. The moment I stopped reacting emotionally and started thinking strategically. The moment I turned pain into planning and emotion into execution. Sometimes I think back to the choice I made, choosing scorched earth instead of counseling, forgiveness, or any of the softer paths that weaker men might have taken. I don't regret it. Not even for a second. She broke the foundational terms of our agreement, and in my world, contracts aren't suggestions. They're rules. You honor them, or you pay the price. There's no gray area where you get to betray someone and then bargain for mercy once you're caught. People occasionally ask if I was too harsh. If maybe I should have given her another chance, tried to see things from her side, shown more compassion. I usually just smile and steer the conversation elsewhere. There's no value in explaining to someone who's never experienced calculated betrayal that mercy isn't always noble. Sometimes the cruelest thing you can do is shield someone from consequences. Accountability, even when it's hated, is often the closest thing to a gift you can give. Olivia received exactly what she earned: 10 years of taking me for granted and 8 months of actively stealing from me. Whether she liked the outcome is irrelevant to whether it was just. My life now is orderly, clean, and free from the chaos that comes with sharing space with someone who sees you as prey instead of a partner. I wake up every morning in a house that's mine, beside a woman who chose me for who I am, not what I provide. And I feel that same quiet satisfaction I felt the night Olivia left, the calm that comes when a problem is solved, an agreement enforced, and a system works exactly as it should. Some people might call that cold. Others might say unforgiving, or emotionally damaged. Those people have never had to rebuild their life from the wreckage of someone else's betrayal. They've never stood in front of a mirror and decided whether they were going to live as a victim or a victor. I chose victory. I'd make the same choice again tomorrow without hesitation. Because at the end of the day, the only person responsible for protecting your interests is you. The moment you forget that is the moment someone like Olivia walks into your life smiling, already planning how to take what you've built while you sleep. I didn't let that happen. I caught it early. I dealt with it efficiently. And I moved forward without looking back. That isn't cruelty. It's survival. It's what happens when you underestimate a man who's spent his entire career identifying weaknesses, closing vulnerabilities, and turning problems into solutions. It's what happens when you bet against someone who treats life like a chessboard and plans 15 moves ahead. And that's why I sleep peacefully every night, because when I was tested, when my entire life was threatened by someone I trusted completely, I didn't break, beg, or compromise. I executed the plan. I followed through. And I came out the other side stronger, smarter, and completely free. Olivia probably tells herself a different story now. She likely believes she was the victim of a cruel man who refused to forgive a single mistake. She's probably convinced herself that what happened to her was unfair, excessive, disproportionate. What she'll never accept is the truth that she designed her own destruction through choices she was too arrogant to fully calculate. I wasn't the villain in that story. I was the mechanism. The consequence. The force that shows up when natural laws are violated. The rain kept falling that night, and many nights after, classic Seattle weather, washing the streets clean and resetting the city. I stood at the window watching it, feeling nothing about the woman who drove away into it, and everything about the future stretching ahead of me, clear and unobstructed. The house was quiet. The accounts were clean. The contracts were enforced. And life moved forward exactly as it should when you refuse to let someone else's betrayal define you. That's what being truly cold when it matters really means. It's not about lacking emotion. It's about refusing to let emotion override judgment when the stakes are too high for mistakes. It's understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from someone who proved they never loved you, and to do it so completely that they become nothing more than a cautionary example you remember when deciding who to trust. 3 years later, I barely remember what her voice sounded like. I couldn't tell you the exact color of her eyes without looking at photos I no longer keep. The woman I divorced and the woman I married feel like two entirely different people now. The Olivia who walked down the aisle in white was someone I truly loved. She disappeared long before I uncovered the affair, replaced by someone else wearing her face and using her name, someone hollowed out by greed and entitlement. The person I destroyed wasn't my wife. She was an imposter. Once I understood that, the path forward became obvious. I don't miss her. I don't wonder how she's doing. I don't care whether she's happy, miserable, or somewhere in between. She's nothing to me now, less than nothing. Just empty space where a person used to be. And in that space, I built something better. Something honest. Something that reflects who I actually am, not who someone else needed me to be. That's the real victory. Not the money. Not the house. Not even watching her fall. It's the freedom that comes from cutting out cancer and replacing it with healthy tissue. Some people will say that makes me bitter, damaged, incapable of intimacy. They're wrong. I have a better relationship now than I ever did with Olivia, precisely because I learned to value actions over words, and results over promises. Every morning when I wake up, I remember that moment in the kitchen, standing there with her phone in my hand, reading those messages, feeling that sudden drop into absolute clarity. I remember the decision I made right then, the choice to fight back instead of folding into victimhood. It reminds me that I am capable of protecting myself, that betrayal didn't break me, it sharpened me. No one will ever take advantage of me like that again because I'm always watching now, always thinking, always a few moves ahead of any potential threat. Some people call that paranoia. I call it earned wisdom, the kind you only gain by going through fire and coming out tempered into something stronger than before. Isabella understands this about me. She knows my trust isn't automatic, it's built, maintained, and proven daily. She doesn't resent that vigilance because she has her own boundaries, shaped by her own history. We both came into this relationship carrying scars, but more importantly, we came carrying lessons. And those lessons make us stronger together than either of us ever was alone. What we have isn't the chaotic, all-consuming passion people mistake for love when they're young. What we have is better. It's a partnership between equals, two people who respect each other's damage and competence, who trust each other because that trust is continuously earned, not blindly assumed. We understand that love without accountability is just another word for enabling harm. That's the lesson Olivia gave me, even if she'll never comprehend it, that love alone is insufficient, passion fades, promises are cheap, and actions are the only currency that matters. And that, ultimately, the only person you can ever fully rely on is yourself. Some would say that's a bleak realization, proof that I've lost faith in people or intimacy. They're wrong. Acknowledging reality isn't the same as surrendering to it. I still believe in love, just a smarter, more deliberate kind of love, one reinforced with boundaries, contracts, and consequences. I still believe in partnership, equal partnership, where contribution and accountability are non-negotiable. And I still believe in mercy, but only in its proper place, and never at the expense of justice or self-preservation. Mercy for Olivia would have meant allowing her to keep stealing, keep lying, keep building an exit plan funded by my labor. That isn't mercy. That's cowardice wearing the mask of compassion. And I refuse to be that man. The man I became the day I uncovered her betrayal is still here, decisive, vigilant, unwilling to hesitate when something needs to be handled. If anyone else ever mistakes me for an easy mark, they'll learn the same lesson she did. This story doesn't end with Olivia crying in the rain. It ends 3 years later with me successful, content, and free, living proof that the best revenge isn't revenge at all, but thriving without the person who tried to destroy you. She thought I needed her. Thought I'd collapse without her. Thought she was essential to my happiness and success. She was wrong about all of it, wrong about me, wrong about herself, wrong about what would happen when she finally pushed too far. That miscalculation cost her everything she had and everything she thought she'd take on her way out. I won because I was prepared. Because I was colder when it mattered. Because I was willing to do what was necessary to protect what was mine. I won because I understood that life isn't a fairy tale where love conquers all, it's a negotiation, and the better strategist walks away intact while the loser pays the price. When the moment came to choose between victim and victor, I chose victory without hesitation. And every morning I wake up in my orderly, honest life remembering that choice, knowing I won, and that makes every step of the process worth it. Some nights I stand at the same window where I once watched Olivia leave, looking out at the endless Seattle rain, and I think about the men standing at similar windows right now reading messages, discovering betrayals, facing the same fork in the road. If I could tell them anything, it would be this: don't waste time drowning in pain or trying to understand why someone betrayed you. Channel everything into strategy. Protect what's yours. Make sure they learn that actions carry consequences and betrayal comes with a cost they can't afford. Be cold when you need to be. Be ruthless when the situation demands it. Never apologize for refusing to be a victim when someone chose to make you one. That isn't cruelty, it's survival. It isn't revenge, it's justice. And it isn't an inability to forgive, it's the intelligence to know the difference between mercy and weakness. Olivia received what she earned. Nathan received what he deserved. And I got my life back, stronger, cleaner, and better than it ever was before. That's how these stories should end. Not with reconciliation fantasies or therapeutic slogans about healing together, but with boundaries enforced, consequences delivered, and victims becoming victors. The rain falls, the city sleeps, and I stand in a house that's mine in every sense of the word, feeling the calm that comes when problems are solved, agreements honored, and life rebuilt on solid ground. This is what winning actually looks like, not a dramatic embrace or swelling music, but a quiet night where you look around at everything you protected and think simply, I handled that correctly. I became stronger instead of bitter, cautious instead of naive, selective instead of cynical. And that's the real ending to this story, not her standing in the rain, but me standing in the warmth of my own space, complete, steady, and ready for whatever comes next.